I can't be a mother, she said, her voice breaking in the dusty New Mexico wind. He smiled, not with pity, but with certainty. I've got 3 calling you mama already. The word should have terrified her. Clara Wynne had traveled 2,000 miles to escape the shame of her barren body, only to find herself standing before a widower and 3 orphaned children who needed exactly what she thought she could never give. But sometimes family isn't born, it's chosen. Stay with me until the end of this story and comment the city you're watching from so I can see how far this tale has traveled. The stagecoach lurched to a stop in a cloud of red dust, and Clara Wynne thought, for the 100th time that week, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Spring of 1875 had painted the New Mexico territory in shades of gold and crimson, the kind of landscape that looked beautiful in paintings but felt merciless under the actual sun. She pressed her handkerchief to her lips, tasting grit and regret, as the driver hauled her single trunk down with a thud that seemed to echo across the empty valley. "Red Bluff Ranch," he announced, gesturing toward a distant cluster of buildings that shimmered in the heat. 5 miles that way. You sure about this, ma'am? Clara nodded, though she wasn't sure about anything anymore. She'd stopped being sure the day Dr. Morrison in St. Louis had set down his instruments and told her with clinical detachment that her womb was inhospitable to life, as if her body were a hostile nation rather than the home she'd always imagined filling with laughter and small running feet. The whispers had started immediately. Poor Clara, such a shame. What man will want her now? Even her own sister had looked at her with that peculiar mixture of pity and relief that seemed to say, "Better you than me." So Clara had done what desperate women had done since the beginning of time. She'd run. West, where the land was wild and people asked fewer questions, where a teaching position and housekeeping job at a remote ranch seemed like exactly the kind of quiet obscurity she needed. The driver tipped his hat and climbed back onto his perch. "Good luck to you, Miss Wynne. You're going to need it out here." She watched the stagecoach disappear into a shrinking dot on the horizon, then picked up her satchel, the one containing everything she owned: 3 dresses, 2 books, a silver locket with her mother's picture, and the letter from Landon Pierce that had brought her here, seeking educated woman for teaching and household management, 3 children, room and board plus modest salary. Inquiries to Red Bluff Ranch, Mesa Verde region, New Mexico territory. It had been the 3 children that decided her. Not because she wanted to be near children, God, that would hurt too much, but because it meant she'd be busy, occupied, too exhausted at the end of each day to think about what she'd lost, or rather, what she'd never had. The walk to the ranch took longer than she'd anticipated. Her boots, sensible for Missouri mud, proved treacherous on loose desert stone. Twice she stumbled, catching herself on scrub brush that scratched her palms. The sun beat down like a physical weight, and her corset, already too tight for the altitude, made each breath a deliberate effort. By the time the ranch buildings came into clear view, Clara's dress was soaked through with perspiration, her face burned despite her bonnet, and she was seriously reconsidering every decision that had led to this moment. Red Bluff Ranch sprawled across a natural plateau, protected on 3 sides by rust-colored cliffs that gave the place its name. The main house was larger than she'd expected, 2 stories of weathered wood with a wide porch that wrapped around the front. Outbuildings scattered around it like children clustering near their mother. A barn, a stable, what looked like a bunkhouse, and several smaller structures she couldn't identify. It should have looked welcoming. Instead, it looked lonely. The kind of place where silence wasn't peaceful, but oppressive, where the wind carried ghosts instead of birdsong. Clara straightened her spine, smoothed her skirts, and approached the house with what remained of her dignity. A man stood on the porch, watching her approach with an expression she couldn't read. Landon Pierce, she presumed, though the letter hadn't prepared her for the reality of him. He was tall, maybe 6 feet, with the kind of broad shoulders that came from actual labor rather than good tailoring. His hair was dark, shot through with silver at the temples, and his face was weathered in that way that made men look either older or more distinguished, depending on your perspective. He wore simple rancher's clothes, denim pants, a faded blue shirt, boots that had seen better years. But it was his eyes that stopped her, dark brown, almost black in the shadow of the porch, and holding something that looked like carefully controlled exhaustion. This was a man hanging on by his fingernails, Clara realized, and she'd just arrived to either help him or make everything worse. Mr. Pierce? Her voice came out steadier than she felt. He nodded once. Miss Wynne, you made good time. The stagecoach was early. She climbed the porch steps, grateful for the shade. I hope my arrival isn't inconvenient. Something that might have been humor flickered across his face. Inconvenient would have been you not showing up at all. Come inside. You'll want water. The interior of the house was dim and mercifully cool. Clara's eyes took a moment to adjust from the brutal sunlight. When they did, she found herself in a large front room that served as both sitting area and dining space. The furniture was simple but well made, a long wooden table, chairs with actual cushions, a bookshelf that made her heart lift with unexpected hope. But it was the details that told the real story. Dust on every surface, dishes stacked haphazardly on the sideboard, a woman's shawl draped over a chair back, untouched for so long it had faded from purple to gray. A widower's house, a home that had forgotten how to be one. Landon returned with a tin cup of water, which Clara accepted gratefully. She drank deeply, not caring about the unladylike gulps, then set the cup down with a decisive clink. I should be direct, Mr. Pierce. She folded her hands in front of her, calling on every ounce of the schoolteacher's authority she'd cultivated over 10 years of managing rowdy classrooms. I came about the teaching and housekeeping position advertised in your letter, but there's something you should know before we go any further. His eyebrows lifted slightly, waiting. Clara took a breath. This was always the hard part, the moment when pity flooded in and opportunity flooded out. I can't have children. The words came out flat, matter of fact. She'd practiced this speech on the stagecoach, determined to control the narrative before someone else did. I'm barren. The doctor was quite clear. If that affects your willingness to employ me, I understand. But I won't work under false pretenses. The silence that followed felt eternal. Clara watched Landon's face, waiting for the usual response. The awkward clearing of throat, the careful step backward, the polite excuses about finding someone more suitable. Instead, he picked up his own cup of coffee from the table and took a long sip, as if she'd just commented on the weather rather than revealed her most shameful secret. Then he set the cup down and said, without a trace of pity or surprise, Good. I've already got 3 calling you Mama. Clara's breath caught. I beg your pardon? June, Thomas, and Willa. He gestured toward the hallway that led deeper into the house. 8, 6, and 3. They've been calling every woman who walks through that door Mama since my wife died 2 years ago. The last 3 housekeepers quit within a month. His dark eyes met hers directly. I'm not looking for someone to give me more children, Miss Wynne. I'm looking for someone who won't run when these 3 decide you're theirs. Before Clara could respond, the hallway erupted with noise. A small girl with wild brown braids came tearing around the corner, pursued by a boy with dirt on his face and determination in his eyes. The girl, June, Clara guessed, skidded to a stop when she saw the stranger in her front room, her eyes going wide and assessing. The boy, Thomas, crashed into his sister's back, stumbled, and caught himself on the doorframe with the practiced ease of someone used to chaos. And from somewhere deeper in the house came the distinctive wail of a toddler who'd just woken from a nap. That's Willa, Landon said unnecessarily, already moving toward the sound. She's teething, again. He disappeared down the hallway, leaving Clara alone with 2 children who were studying her with the kind of intense scrutiny usually reserved for strange insects or potential threats. June spoke first. Are you the new lady? Clara had taught enough children to know that honesty, delivered simply, was always the best policy. I'm Clara Wynne. I'm here about a job. The last one cried, Thomas offered helpfully. Mrs. Henderson. She cried when Willa threw oatmeal at her. The one before that quit because of the spider, June added, with what Clara suspected was suppressed glee. It wasn't even poisonous. And the one before that, that's enough. Landon's voice came from the hallway, mild but firm. He emerged carrying a red-faced toddler who was indeed teething, if the drool-soaked front of her dress was any indication. Don't scare off Miss Wynne before she's even seen her room. Willa twisted in her father's arms to stare at Clara with enormous brown eyes. Her father's eyes, streaming tears. Her lower lip trembled. Clara, operating purely on instinct, reached into her satchel and pulled out a clean handkerchief. Not the dusty one from the stagecoach, but the embroidered one she'd been saving. She held it out to the little girl. "That's very pretty lace," she said quietly. "Would you like to hold it?" Willa's sobs hiccuped to a stop. A chubby hand reached out, grabbed the handkerchief, and immediately stuffed a corner of it into her mouth. "Willa, no," Landon started, but Clara shook her head. "It's just cloth. Let her have it." Something shifted in the room then, subtle but unmistakable. June and Thomas exchanged glances. Landon's shoulders dropped a fraction of an inch. Even Willa seemed to settle, gnawing contentedly on expensive embroidered linen. "Your room's upstairs," Landon said finally. "Second door on the right. It's small but private. There's a wash basin and a window that catches the morning light. Supper's at 6. I'll expect you to start teaching the older two tomorrow, if you're staying." It was phrased as a statement, but Clara heard the question underneath. She looked around the dusty house with its beautiful bones and neglected corners, at the three children watching her with varying degrees of hope and skepticism, at the widower who'd somehow managed to keep all of this together through sheer stubborn will. This wasn't what she'd expected. It wasn't the quiet refuge she'd imagined. It was messier, louder, more complicated. But standing there in that sun-striped front room with a teething toddler drooling on her handkerchief and two wild children waiting to see if she'd run, Clara felt something she hadn't felt since Dr. Morrison's pronouncement, needed. "I'm staying," she said. The room was exactly as Landon had described. Small, private, and catching the last rays of afternoon sun through a window that overlooked the eastern pastures. Clara set her trunk at the foot of the narrow bed and allowed herself one moment of pure exhaustion, sinking onto the mattress with a sigh. The straw tick was thin but clean. Someone, Landon, she presumed, had left a vase of wildflowers on the small table beside the bed. The gesture was so unexpectedly thoughtful that Clara felt her throat tighten. She unpacked methodically, hanging her 3 dresses in the narrow wardrobe, arranging her few books on the windowsill, setting her mother's locket on the table beside the flowers. The room transformed from bare space to something like home with each item placed. A soft knock interrupted her. "Miss Wynne?" June's voice, cautious. "Papa says supper's almost ready, and Thomas wants to know if you're really going to teach us." Clara opened the door to find both children hovering in the hallway, June still in her dusty dress, Thomas with what looked like fresh dirt on his face despite having been indoors. "I am," Clara confirmed. "Do you like learning?" Thomas shrugged. "It's okay. The last teacher only knew McGuffey readers. We've finished those already." June elbowed him. "Don't brag." "It's not bragging if it's true." "Children who finished McGuffey readers should certainly have learned better manners," Clara observed, but she softened it with a slight smile. "What would you like to learn?" The question seemed to surprise them. June's eyes lit up with sudden hope. "Stories? Real ones, not just primers? And mathematics?" Thomas added quickly. "Papa says I need to know figures for the ranch, but Mrs. Henderson only taught us addition." "Stories and mathematics," Claire repeated, filing the information away. Bright children, then, hungry for more than they'd been given. "I think we can manage that. Now, should we go see about this supper?" The dining room table had been set with mismatched plates and bent forks, but someone had attempted to make it nice. A checkered cloth, napkins folded if not precisely pressed. Landon was ladling stew from a pot when they entered. Willa perched on a high chair improvised from what looked like a regular chair with boards nailed across the arms. The toddler still had Clara's handkerchief clutched in one fist. "Sit anywhere," Landon said, not looking up from his task. "We don't stand on ceremony here." Clara chose a seat across from June, next to the high chair. The stew, when Landon set it before her, smelled better than she'd expected. Rich with meat and vegetables, seasoned with something that might have been sage. "You cook?" she asked, unable to hide her surprise. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "I feed us. Whether it counts as cooking is debatable." "It's good," Thomas announced through a mouthful. "Better than Mrs. Henderson's. She burned everything." "Thomas." "Manners." Landon's voice was mild, but the boy immediately closed his mouth and chewed. They ate in relative silence, punctuated by Willa's cheerful babbling and the clink of spoons on tin plates. Clara found herself studying the family dynamic, the way June automatically cut her meat into smaller pieces for her little sister, how Thomas sat up straighter when his father looked at him, the careful distance Landon maintained even while serving second helpings. This was a family held together by routine and necessity, not warmth. It functioned, but it didn't flow. "Miss Wynne," June's voice pulled her from her thoughts. "Where are you from?" "Missouri, a town called Independence. Have you heard of it?" The girl shook her head, but her eyes were bright with interest. "Is it very far?" "Very far," Clara confirmed. "I traveled for almost 2 weeks to get here." "Why'd you come?" Thomas asked bluntly. "Papa's advertisement said it was for teaching and housekeeping, but ladies from Missouri don't usually come to ranches in the middle of nowhere." "Thomas." Landon's tone held warning this time, but Clara shook her head. "It's a fair question." She set down her spoon and considered how much truth to offer. "Sometimes people need a fresh start, new places, new opportunities. Your father offered both." It wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough of it. June seemed to accept this, but Thomas continued to study her with eyes too old for his 6 years. This was a child who'd learned to read people, to assess threats and allies. Clara recognized the look. She'd worn it herself as a girl after her father died, leaving her mother to manage a household on widow's wages. After supper, while Landon settled Willa for the night, Clara found herself alone with the older children in the front room. June had pulled out a slate covered in careful letters, while Thomas was attempting to read from a tattered book by lamplight. "May I see?" Clara asked, gesturing to the slate. June handed it over hesitantly. The letters were well formed, the spelling impeccable for an 8-year-old. At the bottom, she'd written a sentence in careful cursive. "The sky is red when the sun goes down." "That's beautiful," Claire said softly. "Do you like to write?" June's face transformed. I do. I write things down all the time. About the ranch, about the horses, about..." She stopped abruptly, the light dying from her eyes. "About Mama, before I forget." Clara's heart cracked open. She knew that fear, the terror of forgetting, of losing even the memory of someone loved. She'd felt it after her own mother passed. "That's very wise," she said, handing back the slate. "Memories are precious. We should always write down the important ones." Thomas looked up from his book. "Can you really teach us things? Real things?" "I taught in a schoolhouse for 10 years, Clara told him. "I can teach you mathematics through algebra, Latin if you're interested, geography, history, natural sciences." "Sciences?" Thomas sat up straighter. "Like about animals and rocks?" "Exactly like that." The boy's face split into a grin that transformed him from wary to eager in an instant. "The last teacher said science wasn't important, that we just needed reading and sums." "Then the last teacher was wrong," Clara said firmly. "Science is how we understand the world. It's the most important subject there is, besides literature." "Not mathematics?" June teased. "Well, mathematics too. Really, everything is important if you're curious enough." They peppered her with questions then, about Missouri, about cities, about whether she'd ever seen the ocean. Clara answered as best she could, watching them slowly unfold from guardedness into something approaching normal childhood enthusiasm. When Landon returned, he stopped in the doorway, watching the scene with an expression Clara couldn't quite read. There was something like relief in it, mixed with something else, maybe fear, or maybe just exhaustion so deep it had become permanent. "Time for bed," he announced, and both children groaned in perfect unison. "But Miss Wynne was telling us about steamboats," June protested. "The steamboats will still exist tomorrow," their father replied dryly. "Go on, you know the routine." The children trudged toward the hallway, but June paused at the doorway. "Miss Wynne? You're really staying? You won't leave like the others?" The question hung in the air, weighted with too much hope and too much fear. Clara thought about running, about how easy it would be to say this was a mistake, to catch tomorrow's stagecoach back to civilization, to find a position somewhere quieter, simpler, safer. But she looked at June's desperate eyes and Thomas's careful blankness and thought about a little girl upstairs clutching an embroidered handkerchief, and she knew the truth. She'd already stayed longer than she'd planned. "I'm staying," Claire said. "I gave your father my word." After the children had been tucked in, a process that took longer than Claire expected, involving multiple requests for water and one false alarm about a scorpion, she found herself back in the front room with Landon. He'd poured himself a small measure of whiskey and was staring into it like it held answers. "They don't usually warm up that fast," he said finally. Clara settled into the chair across from him. "Maybe they're tired of being suspicious." "Maybe." He took a sip. "Or maybe they've just gotten better at spotting who's going to run and who might stick around." "And which am I?" "Haven't decided yet." The honesty was almost refreshing. Clara found herself appreciating his directness. No false promises, no easy reassurances. "Your wife," she said carefully. "How long has it been?" 2 years this June. Fever took her in 3 days. His voice was flat, reciting facts rather than feeling them. June was 6, Thomas was 4, Willa hadn't been born yet. Amelia was 8 months along when she died. Clara's breath caught. "Willa is premature. The midwife managed to save her, but..." He stopped, jaw working. Amelia never got to meet her, never even knew if she was a boy or girl. The weight of it pressed down on the room, grief so heavy it had its own gravity. Clara understood suddenly why the house felt so haunted. It wasn't just missing a woman, it was missing hope. "The children seem well adjusted," she offered. "Considering." Landon laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Well adjusted, sure. June has nightmares 3 times a week. Thomas hasn't cried since the funeral. Just stopped, like he forgot how. And Willa..." His voice cracked. "Willa doesn't remember her mother at all. Doesn't know what she lost. That might be a mercy. Or a tragedy. Depends on the day." They sat in silence for a moment, the lamp flickering between them. Outside, the wind had picked up, rattling the shutters with a sound like bones. "Why did you really come here, Miss Wynne?" Landon asked suddenly. "And don't tell me it was for teaching opportunities. Women with your credentials could get positions in actual towns with actual schools." Clara considered lying, but she was tired and he'd been honest with her, and somehow in this dusty room at the edge of the world, the truth felt safer than deception. "I was engaged," she said quietly. 3 years. We were supposed to marry last fall, but when the doctor told me I couldn't have children, Charles..." She stopped, surprised by how much it still hurt. "He said he understood. He said it didn't matter, but 2 months later he was courting the daughter of his business partner. They're married now. I heard she's expecting." Landon's expression darkened. "He's an idiot." "He's practical," Clara corrected. "Men need heirs. I can't provide them. It's simple arithmetic." "It's not arithmetic, it's cowardice." He set his glass down with more force than necessary. Real men don't abandon their promises because circumstances change. Something warm flickered in Clara's chest. Not attraction, not yet, but something like recognition. This was a man who understood loyalty, who knew what it cost to keep showing up when everything felt impossible. "In any case," she continued, "I needed to leave. The whispers were everywhere. Poor, barren Clara. What a waste. I couldn't walk to the market without seeing pity in everyone's eyes. So when I saw your advertisement..." She shrugged. "It seemed like divine intervention or desperate coincidence. And now you're here, in the middle of nowhere, with 3 children who aren't yours." "Yes," Clara agreed, "though I'm beginning to think not mine might be more complicated than I expected." Landon studied her for a long moment. "They'll break your heart," he said finally. "Fair warning. They'll need you and love you and test you until you want to scream, and if you leave, it'll destroy them. They've already lost too much." "I know." "Do you?" He leaned forward, intensity burning in his dark eyes. "Because I've had 3 housekeepers in 18 months, Miss Wynne. 3 women who looked at my children like they were temporary problems to manage until something better came along. I can't do that to them again. If you're not sure, if there's any chance you'll run when things get hard, tell me now, please." Clara thought about Charles and his practical decision to marry someone more useful. About her sister's relieved pity. About Dr. Morrison's clinical pronouncement that had defined her as broken. And then she thought about June's desperate question, "You're really staying?" And the way Thomas had grinned when she'd mentioned science, and a toddler named Willa who still had her embroidered handkerchief. "Things are already hard," Clara said, "and I'm still here." It wasn't a promise, not yet, but it was a beginning. Landon nodded slowly, something like hope flickering across his weathered face. "Then I guess we'll find out what you're made of." He stood, collecting his glass, and paused at the doorway. "Thank you, Miss Wynne, for staying, even for tonight." "Clara," she said impulsively, "if your children are going to call me Mama, you might as well use my given name." A real smile then, small but genuine. "Clara, good night." "Good night, Landon." After he left, Clara sat alone in the lamplight, listening to the house settle around her. Somewhere upstairs, a child coughed. The wind rattled the shutters. The lamp oil burned low, casting dancing shadows on the walls. This wasn't the quiet refuge she'd imagined. It was messy and complicated and full of grief she hadn't earned. But as Clara finally climbed the stairs to her small room, she found herself thinking that maybe, just maybe, this broken place was exactly where a broken woman needed to be. In the morning, she'd start teaching. She'd sweep the dust from corners and bring order to chaos. She'd learn the rhythms of this household and find her place in them. But tonight, she was simply Clara Wynne, a woman who couldn't have children, sleeping in a house full of them. And for the first time in 2 years, she didn't feel like a failure. She felt like she might, someday, somehow, feel like home. Clara woke to the sound of something crashing in the kitchen below, followed by a child's muffled curse that would have made a sailor blush. She sat bolt upright in the unfamiliar bed, momentarily disoriented by the slant of morning light through the window and the smell of wood smoke drifting up through the floorboards. The second day. She'd survived the first night. She dressed quickly in her plainest calico dress, the one she'd designated for actual work rather than making impressions, and twisted her hair into a practical bun. Her reflection in the small mirror over the wash basin showed a woman who looked tired but determined, which felt about right. The crash came again, followed by Thomas's voice. "I've got it. Don't tell Papa." Clara hurried downstairs to find the kitchen in a state of contained disaster. Thomas stood on a chair reaching for the coffee pot on the high shelf, while June attempted to light the cook stove with hands that shook from nervousness rather than cold. Flour dusted every available surface, and what looked like the remains of several eggs congealed in a bowl on the table. "Good morning," Clara said mildly, and both children jumped. June's face flushed crimson. "We were trying to make breakfast before you woke up, so you'd think we were helpful and not—" She stopped, biting her lip. "Not more trouble than we're worth," Thomas finished bluntly, climbing down from the chair with the coffee pot clutched against his chest like a trophy. Clara's heart twisted. These children had learned to audition for love, to prove their value before adults decided they were disposable. "Well," she said, rolling up her sleeves and surveying the wreckage, "you've certainly made an impression. Though next time, perhaps wait until I can supervise the egg-breaking part?" June looked like she might cry from relief. "You're not angry?" "I'm impressed you know where everything is kept." Clara took the coffee pot from Thomas, gently, so he wouldn't think she was scolding, and set it on the stove. "But making coffee is dangerous work. The water boils, the pot gets hot enough to burn. Those are jobs for adults until you're older." "Mrs. Henderson said we were underfoot in the kitchen," Thomas muttered. "Then Mrs. Henderson was doing it wrong. Kitchens are for teaching." Clara handed June a rag. "Start wiping down that table. Thomas, sweep up the flour. There's a broom in the corner. I'll get this stove going properly, and then we'll make breakfast together. Does that sound fair?" They nodded, scrambling to obey with an eagerness that spoke of too many disappointed adults in their short lives. Clara knelt by the cook stove, examining the half-hearted fire June had attempted. The kindling was damp. Someone had stored it wrong, and arranged without proper airflow. She cleared it out, started fresh with dry wood from the box beside the hearth, and had a proper fire crackling within minutes. "How'd you do that?" June asked, pausing in her table wiping to stare. "Practice. When I was your age, my mother taught me that fire needs 3 things: fuel, air, and heat. Too much of any one thing and it goes out. Too little, same problem. It's about balance." "Like people," Thomas said suddenly. He flushed when they both looked at him. "Papa says that sometimes. That ranching is about balance. Not too much water, not too little. Not pushing the cattle too hard, but not letting them get lazy either." Your father's a wise man. Clara set the coffee pot to boil and pulled down a cast iron skillet. Now, let's salvage these eggs. June, crack 3 more into that bowl, gently. Thomas, fetch me that jar of lard from the shelf. They worked together in surprisingly comfortable synchronization, the children responding to clear instructions with focused attention. Clara made scrambled eggs with cheese, a luxury she found in the cold box, probably saved for special occasions, and fried thick slices of bread in butter until they were golden and crispy. By the time Landon appeared in the doorway, freshly shaved and carrying a still sleepy Willa, the kitchen smelled like breakfast instead of disaster. He stopped, taking in the scene. The clean table, the children's flour-dusted but proud faces, Clara standing at the stove with a competence that suggested this wasn't her first chaotic morning. I thought I heard a crash, he said carefully. Learning experiences, Claire replied, plating eggs with practiced efficiency. No permanent damage. June and Thomas were kind enough to show me where everything is kept. She watched Landon's expression shift as he understood what she'd done, taken their well-meaning disaster and transformed it into a teaching moment instead of a scolding. Something in his shoulders relaxed. Smells good, he said, settling Willa into her improvised high chair. The toddler immediately reached for Clara, babbling something that might have been mama, or might have been more, but either way made June and Thomas exchange significant glances. They ate breakfast with more conversation than last night's supper. Thomas asked questions about fire building. June wanted to know if Clara had always known how to cook. Even Willa participated, banging her spoon against the high chair tray in rhythmic approval. Landon said little, but Clara felt him watching her, assessing, calculating, trying to determine if this competence was real or performance. She didn't blame him. If she'd been burned by 3 failed housekeepers, she'd be suspicious too. After breakfast, while Landon headed out to handle ranch business, Clara set up an impromptu schoolroom at the dining table. She'd brought few possessions, but among them were 2 treasures she'd carried from Missouri, a primer of advanced reading that went well beyond McGuffey, and a mathematics workbook that had served her well with older students. June and Thomas appeared with their slates, eyeing the books with a mixture of hope and skepticism. All right, Claire began, settling into the familiar rhythm of teaching. June, you said you'd finished McGuffey readers. Let's test that claim. Read this passage aloud. She opened to a section from Shakespeare, simplified but still Shakespeare. June's eyes widened, but she bent to the task, sounding out the unfamiliar words with careful deliberation. That's from a play, the girl said when she'd finished, about fairies. I don't understand all of it, but... She looked up hopefully. Is there more? There's much more, and we'll read it together, and I'll help you understand the parts that are confusing. Clara turned to Thomas. Your turn. If a rancher has 50 head of cattle and he sells 1/5 of them at market for $12 each, how much money does he make? Thomas's brow furrowed in concentration. Claire could almost see him working through the problem, calculating the fraction, then the multiplication. His lips moved silently as he counted. $120, he said finally, then added with less certainty, I think? That's exactly right. Now, same rancher buys feed that costs $3 per 100 pounds. If each cow eats 20 pounds of feed per month, how much does it cost to feed the remaining cattle for 1 month? The boy's face lit up with the challenge. This wasn't boring addition and subtraction from a primer. This was mathematics that meant something, that connected to his world. They worked through the morning, and Clara found herself falling into the old familiar pleasure of teaching. June absorbed literature like a flower drinking rain, asking questions that showed real comprehension. Thomas attacked mathematics with determined focus, occasionally needing help but never giving up. Around mid-morning, Willa toddled into the room, having escaped from whatever corner Landon had left her in. She headed straight for Clara, arms up in the universal demand to be held. Mama, she said clearly. Up. June sucked in a breath. Thomas went very still. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. This was the moment, the first real test. She could correct the child, establish boundaries, make it clear she was Miss Wynne, the teacher and housekeeper, not their mother. But Willa's brown eyes were so trusting, her chubby arms so insistent, and Clara found she couldn't do it. Not today. Maybe not ever. She lifted the toddler onto her lap, settling her against one hip, while she continued explaining fractions to Thomas with her free hand. Willa leaned into her warmth, thumb finding its way to her mouth, and within minutes had fallen asleep against Clara's shoulder. When Clara looked up, she found June staring at her with naked hope. "The others always said no," the girl whispered. When Willa called them Mama, they said it wasn't proper, that she needed to learn the difference. "She's 3 years old," Clara said quietly, "and she's never known a mother. If it comforts her to have the word, what harm does it do?" "It means you're staying," June's voice cracked on the last word. "Doesn't it? You wouldn't let her call you that if you were going to leave." Clara looked at the sleeping child in her arms, at Thomas's carefully neutral expression that didn't quite hide his desperate attention, at June's eyes bright with tears she refused to shed. She thought about the promise she'd made to herself on the stagecoach, that she would keep emotional distance, that she would teach and manage the household but not get attached, that this would be a job and nothing more. That promise, she realized, had lasted approximately 14 hours. "I'm staying," Clara said, and felt the words settle into her bones like truth. "For as long as you'll have me." June burst into tears, not sad ones, but the kind that came from pressure finally released. Thomas ducked his head, but not before Clara saw him swipe at his eyes. Even Willa stirred in her sleep, as if sensing the shift in the room's emotional weather. They worked through the rest of the morning in a different atmosphere, looser, warmer, as if Clara's words had granted them permission to hope. When Landon came in for the noon meal, he found the 3 children clustered around Clara at the table, working together on a geography lesson that involved drawing maps in the dirt June had tracked across the floor. "Learning or making a mess?" he asked, but there was amusement in his voice. "Both," Clara replied. "The best education usually is." They ate cold beef and bread, Clara having been too occupied with teaching to prepare anything elaborate. Landon didn't complain. After the meal, he lingered while Clara cleaned up, the children having been sent outside to burn off energy. "They called you Mama," he said quietly, scrubbing a plate with more attention than necessary. Willa first, but then June slipped and said it too. Thomas caught himself before he did. "I know. And you didn't correct them." Clara set down the pot she was drying and turned to face him directly. "Should I have? Those children have lost enough. If they need a word that brings them comfort, I won't take it from them." Landon was silent for a long moment, studying her face like he was trying to read a difficult passage. "You understand what that means, though? If you let them call you that, they'll believe it. They'll think—" He stopped, jaw working. "They'll think you're permanent." "Maybe I am." "You've been here 2 days, Clara. And in those 2 days, I've learned that June has nightmares about forgetting her mother's face, that Thomas counts cattle in his sleep because it calms his anxiety, that Willa was born into grief and has never known a world that wasn't shaped by loss." Clara's voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly as she folded the dish towel. "I understand what I'm promising. I understand what it will cost if I fail. But I also understand that those children need someone to believe in, and I'd rather risk my heart than guarantee their disappointment." Landon's expression shifted through several emotions too quickly for Clara to track. Finally, he said, "You're not what I expected." "Neither are you." A smile ghosted across his face, there and gone. "Fair enough, just—" He hesitated, then pushed forward. "Don't make promises you can't keep. These kids have had enough of those to last a lifetime." "Then I'll keep the ones I make." The conversation ended there, but something had shifted between them. An understanding, perhaps, or at least an acknowledgement that they were both trying to protect the same 3 fragile hearts from further damage. That afternoon, Clara tackled the house in earnest. The children helped, which meant June carefully dusted low surfaces while Thomas mostly rearranged dirt, but their presence transformed the work from lonely drudgery into something almost pleasant. Clara sang while she worked, old folk songs her mother had taught her, and was surprised when June joined in with a clear, sweet soprano. "Your mother taught you that one?" Clara asked, recognizing the melody. June nodded. "She used to sing it when she did the washing. I remember—" She stopped, face crumpling. "I remember her hands. They were red from the lye soap, and she wore a ring with a blue stone, and she'd—" The girl's breath hitched. Is it bad that I can't remember her face very well anymore? Just pieces? Clara's own grief rose up, unexpected and sharp. Her mother had been gone 12 years now, and there were days when Clara struggled to recall the exact shade of her eyes or the way her laugh sounded in an empty room. "It's not bad," she said gently, kneeling to meet June at eye level. "It's human. Memories fade, even when we fight to keep them. But that's why you write them down, remember? So the pieces you do have stay sharp." "Will you forget us?" The question came out small, terrified. "If you leave someday, will you forget what we look like?" Clara reached out and tucked a strand of hair behind June's ear, a gesture she hadn't planned, but that felt natural as breathing. "I won't forget, I promise you that. Even if I lived to be 100 and traveled to the ends of the earth, I'd remember a brave girl named June who taught me about singing while you work." June threw her arms around Clara's neck with such sudden force they both nearly toppled over. Clara caught herself against the wall, holding the child as she sobbed, huge, wrenching cries that came from somewhere deep and previously untapped. Thomas appeared in the doorway, face pale with alarm, but Clara shook her head at him. Let June cry. Let her release the pressure that had been building since her mother died. This was necessary, even if it hurt to witness. When the storm finally passed, June pulled back, embarrassed. "I'm sorry. I don't know why." "Because you're 8 years old and you lost your mother and no one has let you be sad about it," Clara said firmly. "There's no shame in grief, June. It means you loved well." The girl wiped her nose on her sleeve. "The others, Mrs. Henderson said I was being dramatic, that crying was for babies." "Then Mrs. Henderson was wrong about a great many things." Clara stood, offering her hand. "Come on, let's finish this dusting, and then I'll teach you how to make biscuits from scratch. Your mother's recipe, if your father has it written down." They spent the rest of the afternoon in the kitchen, flour up to their elbows, while Landon's voice drifted in from the yard where he was teaching Thomas how to repair a fence. Clara found Amelia's recipe box tucked in the back of a cabinet, a wooden box with flowers painted on the lid, full of cards written in elegant script. June touched the box like it was holy. "Mama made this. She painted the flowers herself." "Then we'll use it with respect," Clara said, "and we'll keep her recipes alive. That's another way of remembering, cooking the things she loved, keeping her traditions." The biscuits came out imperfect but edible, and at supper that night, Landon took one bite and went very still. "These taste like—" He stopped, cleared his throat. "Like Amelia's." "We used her recipe," June announced proudly. Clara, found Mama's box." Clara watched Landon struggle with emotion, grief and gratitude warring across his weathered face. Finally, he just nodded and took another biscuit, chewing slowly, as if each bite contained a memory he wasn't quite ready to release. After the children were in bed, a process that again involved multiple delays, though Clara was beginning to recognize them as tactics for prolonging her presence, she found herself back in the front room with Landon. He'd poured whiskey again, but this time he offered her a glass as well. Clara accepted, though she rarely drank. The whiskey burned going down, but left a pleasant warmth in its wake. "You made June cry today," Landon said without preamble. "She needed to." "I know. I heard." He swirled his glass, watching the amber liquid catch lamplight. "I never knew how to give her permission for that. Every time she started to break down, He made a frustrated gesture. "I'd fix things, distract her, give her a task, anything to stop the tears. Because her grief reminded you of your own. Because her grief was my failure." The words came out harsh, self-directed. "I'm her father. I'm supposed to protect her from pain. But I couldn't protect her from Amelia dying, and I can't bring her mother back, and every time June cries, it's a reminder that I'm not enough." Clara took another sip of whiskey, choosing her words carefully. "You know that's not how it works, right? Grief isn't a failure of protection. It's proof of love. If June didn't grieve, it would mean she didn't care. Would you prefer that?" "Of course not." "Then let her be sad. Let Thomas be angry, because he is, even if he won't show it. Let Willa ask for her mama, even though she never knew one, because she knows something is missing." Clara leaned forward, intensity burning in her chest. "These children don't need you to fix their pain, Landon. They need you to witness it. To sit with them while they hurt and not run away from the discomfort. Is that what you do? Sit with pain? It's what I learned to do when my own mother died. And later when she stopped, surprised by how close the words had come. When other losses came. You can't outrun grief. It's patient. It'll wait for you to stop moving and then it'll catch up. Landon was quiet for a long moment. Outside, a coyote howled somewhere in the darkness, answered by another farther away. Amelia would have liked you, he said finally. She always said this house needed noise and laughter, that ranch life was too quiet, too lonely. She'd have approved of you letting the children make a mess in the kitchen. Tell me about her? Clara asked softly. He did. Slowly at first, then with gathering momentum, Landon Pierce talked about his wife in a way Clara suspected he hadn't since she died. Amelia had been from Santa Fe originally, the daughter of a merchant. She'd met Landon at a dance and fallen for him despite her father's objections about marrying some cowboy with more land than sense. She'd loved gardening, but could never keep anything alive in the harsh desert climate. She'd wanted more children. At least 6, she'd said. She'd had a birthmark on her left shoulder blade shaped like a crescent moon. As he talked, Clara could feel the ghost of Amelia Pierce settling around them. Not threatening, not jealous, but present. This house was still haunted by her, would always be haunted by her. Clara would be living in another woman's space, using her pots, following her routines. The thought should have been intimidating. Instead, it felt like being trusted with something precious. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said when Landon finally fell silent. I couldn't, even if I wanted to. But I can honor her memory. I can love her children. Is that enough? Landon's eyes were bright with unshed tears. It's more than enough. His voice cracked. It's more than I had any right to ask for. They sat in comfortable silence after that, finishing their whiskey while the lamp burned low. When Clara finally rose to head upstairs, Landon stopped her with a gentle hand on her arm. Thank you, he said. For today. For all of it. For not running when things got messy. Clara smiled. The day I'm afraid of mess is the day I should give up teaching. Children are chaos in small human form. It's what makes them wonderful. She climbed the stairs to her room, her small sanctuary at the end of the hall. But before she could reach it, June's door creaked open. Clara. The girl's voice was small in the darkness. Are you really staying, even after I cried? Especially after you cried. Clara moved to the doorway, keeping her voice low so as not to wake Thomas in the adjacent room. Tears don't scare me away, June. They're just feelings trying to get out. Nothing wrong with that. The others said I was too much, too emotional, too needy. Then the others were fools who didn't deserve you. Clara crouched down to meet June's eyes. You are exactly the right amount of everything. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. June launched herself forward, hugging Clara with desperate strength. I'm glad you came, she whispered against Clara's shoulder. I was so scared when Papa said there was a new lady coming. I thought, she hiccuped, I thought you'd be like the rest, mean or scared or just waiting to leave. I'm not like the rest, Clara said, surprised by her own certainty. I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be. After June was tucked back in, truly asleep this time, her breathing deep and even, Clara finally made it to her own room. She lit her small lamp and sat at the window looking out over the dark expanse of the ranch. The moon was nearly full, painting everything in shades of silver and shadow. She should have been exhausted, should have fallen into bed immediately after such an eventful day. Instead, she found herself reaching for the small journal she'd packed, a habit from her teaching days, when she'd recorded observations about particularly challenging or rewarding students. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, Day 2. Then, in careful script, Today June called me Mama and cried for the first time in months. Thomas is beginning to trust that I won't punish curiosity. Willa sleeps against my shoulder like she's known me her whole life. And Landon, she paused, pen hovering over paper. How did she describe what was happening with Landon? It wasn't romance, not yet. Wasn't even friendship, really. But there was recognition there. 2 wounded people finding unexpected kinship in the work of keeping broken children whole. And Landon is beginning to understand that I'm not running. that this broken family might be exactly where a broken woman belongs. She closed the journal, extinguished the lamp, and finally surrendered to sleep. Her dreams were full of children's laughter and the smell of biscuits baking and a house slowly remembering how to be a home. When she woke the next morning to the sound of the rooster and Thomas's enthusiastic but off-key singing drifting up from the kitchen, Clara smiled into her pillow. 3 days. She'd been at Red Bluff Ranch for 3 days, and already it felt like she'd been there forever. Already the children's rhythms were becoming her rhythms. Already this house with its dusty corners and grief-stained walls was beginning to feel like something she might dare to call home. The thought terrified her. But as Clara dressed and headed downstairs toward the chaos and laughter and beautiful mess of the Pierce family morning routine, she found she was more terrified of leaving, of abandoning these 3 children who'd already lost too much, of disappointing a man who'd trusted her with his most precious treasures, of proving right everyone who'd ever said she was too broken to be worth keeping. So she didn't think about leaving. She thought about today, teaching June more Shakespeare, helping Thomas master long division, making sure Willa had her midday nap. Tomorrow could take care of itself. Today, she had a family to love. Even if they weren't hers by blood, they were becoming hers by choice. And Clara was beginning to understand that the second kind of family, the kind you built from determination and daily presence and stubborn refusal to abandon ship when storms came, was sometimes the strongest kind of all. She found them in the kitchen, Landon attempting pancakes with mixed success, June setting the table with solemn precision, Thomas stealing bacon from the pan and pretending innocence when caught, Willa banging her spoon in joyful anticipation. "Good morning, Mama," June called out, the word coming naturally now, without hesitation or fear. Thomas echoed it a second later, ducking his head but grinning. Even Willa chimed in, her version sounding more like "Mama, Mama," but close enough. Landon met Clara's eyes over the chaos, a question in his expression. "Are you okay with this?" Clara smiled, rolled up her sleeves, and waded into the beautiful disaster of breakfast. "Good morning, family. Who's ready to burn the bacon and call it breakfast?" The children's laughter filled the kitchen, spilling out through open windows into the desert morning, and for the first time since Dr. Morrison's pronouncement, Clara felt something she'd thought lost forever. Hope. The weeks that followed settled into something resembling routine, though Clara was learning that routine on a ranch meant expecting the unexpected. June progressed through literature with voracious appetite, devouring poetry and prose with equal enthusiasm. Thomas had moved beyond basic arithmetic into concepts that would have challenged students twice his age. Even Willa was learning colors, shapes, simple words that she'd babble proudly while Clara worked in the kitchen. But it was the quiet moments that revealed the depth of what they were building. The way June would slip her hand into Clara's when they walked to the creek. How Thomas had started leaving small gifts on Clara's pillow. Smooth stones, interesting feathers, once a perfectly preserved bird's nest. The way Willa would cry if Clara left her sight for too long, then settle instantly when returned to her arms. They were claiming her, making her theirs in 1,000 small ways. And Clara, despite every promise she'd made herself about maintaining distance, was letting them. It was late May when the first real test came. Clara had been at Red Bluff Ranch for nearly 6 weeks, and the household had transformed. The dust was gone, replaced by clean surfaces and the smell of lemon oil. Amelia's garden plot, abandoned for 2 years, had been cleared and replanted with herbs and vegetables. Even the children looked different, healthier, happier, their eyes holding light instead of wariness. Landon had noticed. Clara caught him watching her sometimes, expression unreadable, as she moved through tasks that had defeated 3 previous women. But he said little, keeping whatever he felt locked behind that careful reserve. Until the afternoon they went to town. Mesa Verde's main settlement was more trading post than proper town, a cluster of buildings serving the scattered ranches and miners working the distant hills. Clara had avoided it during her first weeks, content to stay within the safe boundaries of the ranch. But supplies were needed, and Landon had suggested she accompany him to select fabric for new dresses for the girls. "June's growing like a weed," he'd said that morning, finishing his coffee in quick gulps. "And Willa's about to bust out of everything she owns. Figured a woman would know better what to buy than I would." So Clara had dressed in her second-best dress, the gray one with the modest bustle, and helped load the children into the wagon. June and Thomas sat in the back, legs dangling, while Willa perched between Clara and Landon on the bench seat, chattering her nonsense words to anyone who'd listen. The ride took nearly 2 hours across terrain that alternated between rocky and simply desolate. But the children kept the journey lively, pointing out landmarks and telling stories that may or may not have been true. "That's where Thomas got chased by a bull," June announced, gesturing to a distant pasture. "I wasn't chased," Thomas protested. "I was strategically retreating. You were screaming like your pants were on fire." "Was not. Was too." Clara hid her smile behind her hand while Landon's shoulders shook with suppressed laughter. "You were definitely screaming," he confirmed. "Heard you from the house. Mrs. Henderson said it was undignified." "Mrs. Henderson never got chased by a bull," Thomas muttered, which was fair. The settlement appeared as a smudge on the horizon that gradually resolved into buildings. Clara counted perhaps 15 structures total: a general store, a saloon, what might have been a boarding house, and various smaller establishments whose purposes weren't immediately clear. Landon pulled the wagon up in front of the general store, a weathered building with a hand-painted sign declaring it Morrison's Goods and Provisions. He helped Clara down, his hand lingering a moment longer than strictly necessary, then lifted Willa while June and Thomas scrambled down on their own. "I need to see about supplies," Landon said. "Morrison usually has the order ready, but it'll take time to load. You all right taking the children to look at fabric?" Clara nodded, already feeling June's hand slip into hers. "We'll manage fine." The bell above the door jangled as they entered, and Clara was immediately struck by the overwhelming smell of everything: tobacco and leather and dried goods, and about 50 other scents competing for dominance. The store was cramped but well stocked, every available surface covered with merchandise. A thin man with spectacles looked up from behind the counter. "Landon Pierce, been wondering when you'd come by. Got your order in the back." His gaze shifted to Clara and the children, curiosity naked on his face. "And who might this be?" "Clara Wynne," she said, extending her hand with the confidence she'd learned as a teacher. "I'm helping Mr. Pierce with the children and household." "Ah." Morrison shook her hand, but his eyes had that look Clara was learning to recognize, the one that said he was already composing the story he'd tell his wife later. "Heard he'd brought in someone new. You're the fourth, ain't you?" "I suppose I am." "The others didn't last long. You planning to stick?" Before Clara could respond, June spoke up, voice clear and certain. "She's not like the others. She's our mama." The silence that followed was profound. Morrison's eyebrows disappeared into his hairline. Even Thomas looked surprised by his sister's boldness. Clara's heart hammered, but she kept her expression neutral. "I'd like to see your fabric selection, Mr. Morrison. The girls need new dresses." He gestured toward a corner where bolts of cloth were stacked. "Over there, take your time." Clara steered the children toward the fabric, acutely aware of Morrison's continued staring. June seemed oblivious to the bomb she'd just dropped, already examining a bolt of blue calico with critical eye. "This would look nice on Willa," the girl declared. "Matches her eyes." "It does." Clara ran her fingers over the cloth, testing quality. "But she'll outgrow it quickly. We should choose something durable." They were debating the merits of various patterns when another woman entered the store, middle-aged, well-dressed in a way that suggested she considered herself several rungs above the average ranch wife. Her gaze swept the store and landed on Clara and the children with laser focus. "Well," she said, voice carrying that particular sweetness that meant trouble, "you must be the new housekeeper everyone's talking about." Clara straightened, instinctively positioning herself between the woman and the children. "Clara Wynne, and you are?" "Margaret Dawson. My husband owns the Double D Ranch, north of Pierce's land." She moved closer, eyes cataloging every detail of Clara's appearance. "It's quite the topic of conversation, you know. The widower bringing in yet another woman to raise his children. I'm sure people have better things to discuss." "You'd think so. But when a man keeps cycling through housekeepers like they're seasonal help," Margaret's smile didn't reach her eyes. "Well, it does make one wonder what the situation is really like out there." June's hand tightened in Clara's. Thomas had gone very still, that careful blankness sliding over his features. Even Willa seemed to sense the tension, pressing closer to Clara's skirts. "The situation," Clara said clearly, is that 3 children needed stability, and I'm providing it. I'm not sure what else there is to wonder about. Oh, I'm sure your intentions are pure. Margaret's tone suggested she thought no such thing. It's just that the last 3 women had pure intentions too. Yet here you are, number 4. Makes a body curious about what drives them off. Maybe they just weren't suited to the work. Clara kept her voice level, but fury was building in her chest. This woman was saying these things in front of the children, as if they weren't standing right there, as if they couldn't hear every implied criticism of their father. Maybe. Margaret picked up a bolt of yellow fabric, examining it with feigned interest. Or maybe there's something about living in isolation with a widower that proves too complicated for decent women. The talk, you know. People do talk. Then people should find more productive ways to spend their time. Clara's tone must have finally registered because Margaret's smile froze. I'm only trying to help. Warn you, so to speak, before you get too attached to a situation that's likely temporary. Mama's not temporary, June burst out, tears streaming down her face. She's staying! She promised! The girl's anguish cut through Clara's anger like a blade. She knelt immediately, gathering June close. Hush now. I did promise, and I meant it. But she said, she's wrong. Clara met Margaret Dawson's eyes over June's head, and her voice could have frozen water. I'm not going anywhere. Margaret's face reddened. Well, I can see you've already gotten quite familiar with the family. I hope for your sake that familiarity doesn't lead to complications. Are you quite finished, Mrs. Dawson? The new voice came from behind them. Clara turned to find Landon standing in the doorway, arms crossed, expression darker than she'd ever seen it. Margaret startled. Mr. Pierce, I didn't realize, obviously. He moved into the store with deliberate steps, positioning himself beside Clara and the children. Because if you'd realized I was here, I imagine you'd have thought twice before insulting my family. I wasn't insulting anyone. I was merely, you were implying impropriety where none exists. You were questioning Miss Wynn's character in front of my children. You were spreading the kind of poisonous gossip that decent people should be ashamed of. Landon's voice remained calm, but there was steel underneath. Is there anything else you'd like to say to Clara? Because I'm happy to continue this conversation. Margaret drew herself up. I was trying to help. No, you were trying to create scandal where there isn't one. Miss Wynn is my children's teacher and household manager. She lives in her own room. She's treated with nothing but respect. And even if none of that were true, even if every nasty implication you're making was accurate, it would still be none of your concern. He paused. Now, unless you're purchasing something, I believe you have other places to be. The woman's mouth opened and closed like a landed fish. Finally, she turned on her heel and swept out of the store, back rigid with affronted dignity. The bells jangling marked her exit like punctuation. Clara realized she was shaking. June was still crying against her shoulder, and Thomas had moved close enough that she could feel his warmth against her side. Even Willa was clinging to her skirts with both hands. I apologize for that, Landon said quietly. Margaret Dawson has made a career out of other people's business. I should have warned you she'd be circling. You shouldn't have to warn me about people being cruel. Claire's voice came out thick. Not in front of the children. No, I shouldn't. He crouched down to June's level. Hey, sweetheart, look at me. The girl lifted her tear-stained face. Mrs. Dawson is wrong, Landon said firmly. Clara's not going anywhere, and anyone who says different is going to answer to me. Understand? June nodded, hiccuping. But everyone's talking about us. Everyone thinks, let them think, we know the truth. He stood, addressing all 3 children now. The truth is that Clara came here when we needed her most. She's taught you, cared for you, made our house feel like a home again. Anyone who wants to make that into something ugly is telling you more about themselves than about us. Morrison cleared his throat from behind the counter. For what it's worth, Pierce, most folks around here don't think nothing bad about your arrangement. Margaret Dawson's got a gift for stirring pots that don't need stirring. My wife thinks Miss Wynn's a saint for taking on 3 young ones. The words were kindly meant, but they reminded Clara exactly how visible she was. how every choice she made would be scrutinized and judged by people who'd never walked in her shoes. They finished their shopping in subdued silence. Clara selected sturdy fabrics for the girls' dresses, declined Landon's offer to buy her something for herself, and helped load the supplies into the wagon with mechanical efficiency. The ride home was quiet. Even the children seemed drained by the confrontation, June dozing against Thomas's shoulder while Willa slept in Clara's arms. Landon finally broke the silence when they were an hour from the ranch. "You held your ground back there." "I was angry." "You had every right to be. Margaret Dawson's a—" He glanced at the children, modified his language. "She's not a kind woman. She said what others are thinking." Clara stared at the horizon, watching the red cliffs of home grow closer. "You know she did. We're an unconventional arrangement. People will always talk." "Does it matter?" His hands were steady on the reins, but Clara could see tension in his shoulders. "What they think. It matters for the children. They'll hear the whispers. June already has." June heard one bitter woman being vicious. That's not the same as truth. Clara turned to look at him. "But where's the lie, Landon? I live in your house. I sleep under your roof. I care for your children. In certain circles, that's enough for scandal, regardless of the reality. In certain circles, a woman's got no options but marriage or misery. You're choosing a third way. That always makes people uncomfortable." He was quiet for a moment. "Is that what this is about? You're worried about your reputation?" "I'm worried about theirs." Clara gestured to the sleeping children. "What happens when they go to town and someone makes a comment? When another child says their mama's not really their mama, that she's just hired help pretending? Then they'll tell the truth, that you're more of a mother than most blood relations ever managed to be." The words settled between them, heavy with meaning Clara wasn't quite ready to examine. She adjusted Willa in her arms, using the movement to avoid Landon's gaze. "Margaret said I was the fourth," she said finally. "The fourth woman you've brought in. You are." "What happened to the others?" Landon sighed. "The first one lasted 3 weeks, Mrs. Kershaw. Nice enough woman, but she couldn't handle the isolation. Cried herself to sleep every night. June heard her, and had nightmares. I sent her back to Santa Fe with a month's wages and an apology." "The second?" "Mrs. Henderson. You've heard the children mention her. She stayed 4 months, longest of the lot. But she was rigid. Everything had rules. The children couldn't be children around her. When she told Thomas he was wicked for getting his clothes dirty while doing ranch chores, I knew it was time for her to go." "And the third?" His jaw tightened. "Miss Elizabeth Morton, 22 years old, fresh from some finishing school back east. Her father sent her out here to build character before her society debut." He made a sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "She lasted 3 days, took one look at how much actual work was involved, and claimed she'd caught malaria. Was on the next stage back to civilization. So I'm following a proud tradition of failure. You're nothing like them." Landon's voice was firm. "Those women saw this as a job, a temporary inconvenience. You see it as—" He stopped, searching for words. "You see my children as people worth knowing, worth loving. That makes all the difference." Clara wanted to argue, to maintain the protective distance she'd started with, but the truth was softer and more complicated than she wanted to admit. "They make it easy," she said quietly. "To love them. They're remarkable children." "They are. And they've decided you're theirs. There's no going back from that, Clara. You know that, right? Even if you left tomorrow, you'd have marked them. They'd spend the rest of their lives measuring other people against you." The weight of it pressed down on her chest. "That's terrifying." "That's parenthood." He glanced at her, expression unreadable in the fading light. "Welcome to the club." They pulled into the ranch as the sun was setting, painting everything in shades of gold and crimson. Clara helped get the sleeping children inside and up to their beds, moving through the familiar routine with practiced ease. June woke enough to mumble something that might have been "love you" before burrowing back into her pillow. Thomas didn't wake at all, just shifted when Landon removed his boots. Willa stirred when Clara laid her in the crib, reaching out with one chubby hand. "Mama," she whispered, "stay." Clara stood by the crib until the toddler's breathing evened out, one hand resting on the small back. These children, These impossible, wonderful, heartbreaking children who'd claimed her without permission and changed everything she thought she knew about herself. She found Landon in the kitchen, making coffee despite the late hour. He poured 2 cups without asking and handed her one. "I need to tell you something," he said, and the seriousness in his tone made Clara's stomach clench. "All right." "What Margaret Dawson said today, about complications, she's not entirely wrong." He ran a hand through his hair, clearly struggling. Not in the way she meant, but he met Clara's eyes. "You're not just the housekeeper anymore. Haven't been for weeks. The children call you Mama. They look to you for comfort, for teaching, for everything. And He stopped, jaw working. "I've come to rely on you in ways I didn't anticipate, ways that make the lines blurry." Clara's heart was racing. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that we should probably make this arrangement official, legal, before Margaret Dawson's gossip becomes something that actually harms the children." "Official how?" Landon set down his cup with deliberate care. "Marriage. Paper marriage, if that's what you want. Separate rooms, separate lives, but legal protection. The children would be legally yours. You'd have rights, security, and no one could question the propriety of the arrangement." The word hung between them like a challenge. Marriage. To a man she'd known less than 2 months. To formalize a relationship that was already complicated beyond measure. "That's not necessary," Clara managed. "I'm not worried about gossip." "Maybe you should be. Maybe I should be." His eyes were dark, intense. "Clara, if something happened to me, if I got kicked by a horse or thrown from the wagon or any of the 100 ways ranchers die, those children would be wards of the state. You'd have no claim to them. They'd be separated, sent to different families or orphanages. Everything you've built with them would be gone." The thought made her physically ill. June crying herself to sleep in some stranger's house. Thomas learning to wall off his emotions even more completely. Willa forgetting that she'd ever had a mama who loved her. "You're trying to manipulate me," she said, but there was no heat in it. "I'm trying to protect them. And you." He moved closer, not touching but near enough that she could feel his presence. "I'm not asking for a real marriage. I'm not asking you to share my bed or pretend feelings that don't exist. I'm asking you to let me give you the legal standing to be what you already are, their mother." Clara's thoughts were spinning. "And what do you get out of this arrangement?" "Peace of mind, knowing that if something happens to me, the children will stay with someone who loves them. Knowing that you're not going to wake up one day and realize you've wasted years of your life on someone else's family with nothing to show for it." "Is that what you think? That I'm here calculating my return on investment?" "No, I think you're here because you have a gift for loving broken things. But I also think you deserve better than being the eternal temporary woman in these children's lives." His voice softened. "You deserve to be chosen, claimed, made permanent." The words hit something deep and wounded in Clara's chest. Made permanent, as if she were something valuable enough to keep. "I need time to think," she whispered. "Take all the time you need. The offer stands, whenever you're ready." He stepped back, giving her space. "Or never, if that's your choice. Either way, you're part of this family now. That doesn't change." Clara escaped to her room and spent the night staring at the ceiling, thoughts churning. Marriage. To Landon Pierce. It should have felt like surrender, like admitting defeat in her original plan to maintain distance and independence. Instead, it felt like possibility, not romance. She wasn't naive enough to confuse legal convenience with love, but partnership. A formal acknowledgement of what they'd been building together these past weeks. A way to protect the children and give herself the security she'd never dared to want. But was that enough? Could she sign her name to a marriage built on pragmatism rather than passion? Could she spend her life in separate rooms with a man who saw her as a solution to a problem rather than a woman worthy of desiring? The questions kept her awake until dawn. She fell asleep just as the sun rose and was awakened what felt like minutes later by June's panicked voice in the hallway. "Clara, Papa, Willa's burning up." Clara was out of bed and moving before she was fully conscious, heart hammering. She burst into Willa's room to find the toddler writhing in her crib, skin flushed scarlet, breath coming in labored gasps. Fever, high fever, from the feel of her forehead. Landon appeared in the doorway, took one look, and went white. "Not again, please God, not again." Clara understood immediately. Amelia had died of fever, the same kind of sudden, vicious illness that could steal life in days. But there was no time for fear, only action. June, get me cool water and cloths. Thomas, run to the kitchen and bring up the whiskey. Landon. She met his terrified eyes. I need you to ride for the doctor. Now. The doctor's in Santa Fe. That's a full day's ride. Then you'd better ride fast. Clara's voice was steel. Go. I'll take care of her. He hesitated one more second, then turned and ran. Within minutes, Clara heard hoofbeats thundering away from the ranch. Then it was just her and 3 terrified children and a toddler burning with fever. Clara stripped Willa down to her underthings and began sponging her with cool water, working systematically to bring down the temperature. June and Thomas hovered nearby, pale and shaking. Is she going to die? June whispered. Like Mama did? No. Clara didn't know if it was true, but she said it with absolute conviction. She's not going to die. I won't let her. For the next 6 hours, Clara fought for Willa's life with nothing but water, whiskey for the fever, and desperate prayer. The toddler convulsed twice, her small body racked with seizures that left Clara's hands shaking. But each time she came through, each time she kept breathing. June and Thomas helped with quiet efficiency, fetching water, wringing out cloths, taking turns watching their sister while Clara forced down quick bites of food. They'd done this before, Clara realized. They knew the routine of crisis. They'd learned it the hard way when their mother died. By sunset, Willa's fever finally broke. Her skin cooled, her breathing eased, and she slipped into proper sleep instead of feverish delirium. Clara slumped against the wall, exhausted beyond words. June immediately crawled into her lap, Thomas pressed against her side. All 3 of them watched Willa sleep, not quite daring to believe the danger had passed. You saved her, June said quietly. The others would have run, would have said to get the doctor, and not known what to do while we waited. But you saved her. Clara pressed a kiss to the girl's hair. We saved her, all of us together. Mama saved her, Thomas said firmly. Mama knew what to do. The word didn't feel honorary anymore. It felt earned, claimed through crisis and terror and the stubborn refusal to let death steal another child from this house. When Landon finally returned near midnight, the doctor following on a slower horse, he found Clara asleep in the chair beside Willa's crib, with June and Thomas curled on the floor beside her. The doctor examined Willa, declared her out of danger, and left instructions for continued care. Landon paid him, saw him out, and returned to find Clara awake. You saved her, he said, voice rough. The doctor said another few hours without treatment, and he stopped, unable to finish. Clara stood on shaking legs. I did what any mother would do. You're not any mother. Landon closed the distance between them. You're their mother. Mine to claim, if you'll have them. If you'll have us. Clara looked at the sleeping children, June and Thomas on the floor, Willa peaceful in her crib. This family that had somehow become hers without her permission. This life she'd stumbled into thinking it would be temporary, and that had proven to be anything but. Ask me again, she whispered. About marriage. Ask me again. Landon's eyes searched hers. Marry me, Clara Wynne. Not for convenience or protection or any practical reason. Marry me because these children need you. Because I need you. Because you're already family in every way that matters. And I want to make it permanent. Clara thought about Charles, who'd loved her right up until she became inconvenient. About the doctor who'd declared her broken. About a lifetime of being told she wasn't enough. And then she thought about June's desperate question. You're really staying? And Thomas's careful gifts left on her pillow, and Willa's feverish body cooling under her hands. She thought about a man who'd offered her forever without demanding anything she couldn't give. Yes, she said. Yes, I'll marry you. Landon's expression cracked open with relief and something that looked almost like joy. You mean it? I mean it, Clara managed a tired smile. Though I reserve the right to change my mind if you turn out to be terrible at marriage. He laughed, real laughter, the first she'd heard from him. Fair enough. Though given that we're starting with separate rooms and no expectations, I figure the bar is pretty low. They stood there in the dim room, 3 sleeping children around them, and Clara felt something shift in her chest. Not love. Not yet. Not romantic love, anyway. But something solid. Something that felt like foundation. Like the beginning of permanent. Like home. The morning after Landon's proposal found Clara in the kitchen before dawn. Hands wrapped around a cup of coffee she was too anxious to drink. Her acceptance hung in the air like smoke. Substantial but shapeless. And in the cold light of near morning, she was beginning to question her own sanity. Marriage. She'd agreed to marriage. To a man she'd known for 6 weeks. A practical arrangement, yes, but still binding. Still permanent in ways that terrified her. "You're up early." Clara jumped, sloshing coffee onto the table. Landon stood in the doorway, already dressed for ranch work, hair damp from washing. He looked as tired as she felt, shadows under his eyes speaking to a night as sleepless as her own. "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, reaching for a rag to clean up the spill. "Keep thinking about what we agreed to, what it means." He poured himself coffee and joined her at the table, maintaining careful distance. "Having second thoughts?" "Having all the thoughts." Clara managed a weak smile. "This is madness, you realize. People don't marry for practical reasons anymore. This isn't the 17th century. People marry for practical reasons all the time out here. Land, water rights, combining herds." His voice was matter-of-fact. "At least we like each other. That's more than most arranged marriages start with." "Do we? Like each other?" The question came out more vulnerable than Clara intended. "Or do we just both love the same 3 children?" Landon considered this, swirling his coffee thoughtfully. "I think you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. I think you're sharp-tongued when you need to be and gentle when it matters. I think you saved my daughter's life yesterday without hesitation." He met her eyes. "Whether that counts as liking, I don't know. But it's something." Clara's throat tightened. "I think you're a better father than you give yourself credit for. I think you've held this family together through grief that would have destroyed lesser men. I think—" She stopped, surprised by the emotion welling up. "I think Amelia chose well when she chose you." The silence that followed was heavy with things neither of them knew how to say. Finally, Landon cleared his throat and stood. "I'll ride to Santa Fe today. File the paperwork, find a minister willing to come out here. Should take a few days to arrange." He paused at the door. "Unless you want a proper ceremony, dress, guests, all that?" Clara almost laughed. "God, no. Simple is fine. The simpler, the better. Simple it is." He hesitated, hand on the doorframe. "Clara, thank you for saying yes, for all of it." Then he was gone, leaving her alone with her spinning thoughts and the slowly lightening sky. The children woke to find their father already gone and Clara making pancakes with slightly shaking hands. June appeared first, hair wild from sleep, and immediately went to check on Willa. When she returned, relief was written clear on her young face. "She's awake, asking for water and calling for you." Clara abandoned the pancakes and hurried upstairs to find Willa sitting up in her crib, looking pale but alert. The toddler's face split into a grin when she saw Clara. "Mama, up!" Clara lifted her carefully, checking for fever, for any sign of yesterday's crisis. But Willa felt cool, if a bit clammy, and her eyes were bright with their usual curiosity rather than fever haze. "How do you feel, sweet girl?" "Hungry," Willa announced. "Want pancakes." It was the most complete sentence Clara had ever heard from her, and the normalcy of it made her want to cry with relief. Instead, she hugged the toddler close and carried her downstairs, where Thomas was attempting to flip the abandoned pancakes with mixed success. "She's all right?" he asked anxiously. "She's all right, hungry even." The boy's shoulders sagged with relief. "Good. That's real good." They ate breakfast together, the children chattering about everything and nothing, seemingly determined to fill the house with noise after yesterday's terrifying quiet. Clara let the sound wash over her, watching them with new eyes. These would be her children. Legally, officially hers in a way that made her heart race with equal parts joy and terror. "Where's Papa?" June asked, sopping up syrup with her last bite of pancake. "Santa Fe. Business to handle." Clara kept her voice casual. "He'll be back in a few days." Thomas narrowed his eyes. "What kind of business?" "The boring kind. Don't worry about it." But Thomas had inherited his father's ability to read unspoken truths. He studied Clara's face for a long moment, then went very still. "You're getting married," he said flatly. "That's why he went to Santa Fe, to get papers or whatever you need." June gasped. "Really? You and Papa?" Clara considered lying, decided these children had dealt with enough deception in their short lives. "Yes. It's not. It's a practical arrangement. To make things legal. To make sure I can always be here for you, no matter what happens." "But you'll be our real mama then?" June's voice was small, hopeful. "Not just pretending?" "I'm already your real mama, papers or no papers. But yes, this makes it official." Willa, understanding nothing of the conversation's significance, banged her spoon cheerfully. "Mama! Mama!" Thomas was quiet, processing. Finally, he said, "Does this mean Papa likes you? Like the way he liked our first mama?" The question was so achingly vulnerable that Clara had to swallow hard before answering. "I think your Papa and I like each other just fine, but it's different from what he had with your mother. This is about taking care of all of us. Making sure we're a family that can't be broken apart." "Good." Thomas nodded once, decided. "Because I don't want you to leave. Ever." "Me neither," June whispered. Clara gathered them close, these children who'd somehow become hers, and let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, this madness would work. The next 3 days passed in strange suspension. Clara threw herself into household projects with manic energy, as if staying busy could keep her from thinking too hard about what was coming. She reorganized the kitchen, finished the dresses for the girls, taught the children with perhaps too much intensity. They seemed to sense her nervous energy and grew quieter, more watchful. It was June who finally called her out on it. "You're scared," the girl said on the third afternoon, finding Clara attacking the pantry with unnecessary vigor. "About marrying Papa." Clara sat back on her heels, caught. "A little." "Why? You already live here. This just makes it official." "I know. It's just—" How did she explain adult fears to an 8-year-old? "Marriage is permanent. It changes things." "Is that bad?" June settled on the floor beside her, unconsciously mimicking Clara's posture. "Changing things? Not bad. Just scary. What if I'm not good at being a wife? What if your father regrets choosing me?" June looked at her with those two old eyes. "Mama, first Mama, she used to say that family isn't about being perfect. It's about showing up. You've shown up every day since you got here. That's what matters." From the mouths of babes. Clara pulled June into a fierce hug, blinking back tears. "When did you get so wise?" "I've always been wise. You just weren't paying attention." The sound of hoofbeats interrupted Clara's laugh. She and June exchanged glances. Landon, returning. 3 days in Santa Fe, and now he was back, presumably with whatever arrangements he'd made. Clara's stomach nodded. They found Landon in the front room, dusty and tired, talking to Thomas, while Willa climbed on his shoulders with delighted squeals. He looked up when Clara and June entered, and something in his expression made her breath catch. Not regret, not hesitation, just quiet determination. "It's arranged," he said without preamble. "Minister will be here tomorrow afternoon. I filed the papers. They're waiting for signatures. Got these too." He pulled a small box from his pocket and opened it to reveal 2 plain gold bands. Clara stared at the rings, simple, unadorned, practical. Exactly right for a practical marriage. So why did the sight of them make her want to cry? "They're my parents' rings," Landon continued. "My father gave them to me before he died. Said to use them when I found someone worth keeping." He met Clara's eyes. Seemed appropriate. June bounced excitedly. "Can I see? Are you really getting married tomorrow?" "We really are." Landon's voice was steady, but Clara could see tension in his shoulders. "Quick ceremony, just family, nothing fancy." "Can I help Clara get ready?" June was already planning. "We could do her hair special and maybe pick flowers." "June, breathe." Clara managed to smile. "It's just a formality. No need for fuss." But June was already gone, running to tell Thomas the news and probably wake Willa from her nap in the process. The sudden silence left Clara and Landon alone, the space between them charged with unspoken questions. "Having second thoughts?" he asked quietly. Constantly. Clara moved to the window, staring out at the red cliffs that had become so familiar. But I haven't changed my mind, if that's what you're asking. What are you afraid of? The question was gentle, but it cracked something open in Clara's chest. She turned to face him, decision made to be honest, even if it hurt. I'm afraid of not being enough. Of you waking up one day and realizing you've tied yourself to a barren woman who can never give you more children. Of the children growing up and not needing me anymore. Of... Her voice broke. Of building a life here and having it taken away because I'm not really the mother, not really the wife, just the woman playing at both. Landon crossed the room in 3 long strides and took her hands in his. The touch was warm, calloused, solid. Listen to me. You are enough. You've always been enough. The fact that you can't bear children doesn't make you less. It makes you available to love the ones who need you most. His voice was fierce. As for tomorrow, I'm not promising you romance or passion or any of the pretty things people usually promise at weddings. But I'm promising you this. You will be legally bound to those children. You will have rights that can't be taken away. And if anything happens to me, you will inherit everything. This ranch, the money, all of it. So you'll never be dependent on anyone's mercy again. Clara's eyes burned. I'm not doing this for money. I know. That's why I want you to have it. He squeezed her hands gently. Clara, you saved my family. Let me give you security in return. It's the least I can do. Before she could respond, Thomas appeared in the doorway. Miss Clara, June's trying to cut flowers with the kitchen knife. Thought you should know. The moment broke. Clara laughed shakily and went to prevent her future daughter from either dismembering herself or destroying the garden. But she carried Landon's words with her like armor against the doubt. You are enough. You've always been enough. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the desert air crisp with the promise of summer. Clara woke to find June and Willa already in her room, the older girl holding a dress Clara had never seen before. It was my first mama's, June said shyly. Papa said you could wear it if you wanted, for today. It's not white or anything fancy, but she held it up. It's pretty. The dress was indeed pretty. A soft gray-blue cotton with simple embroidery at the collar and cuffs. Amelia's dress. Amelia's wedding, perhaps, or some other significant occasion. Claire should have felt strange about wearing a dead woman's clothes to marry that woman's husband. Instead, she felt honored, as if Amelia herself was giving blessing to this strange arrangement. It's perfect, Clara said, taking it gently. Help me get ready? What followed was perhaps the most unconventional wedding preparation in the history of the New Mexico territory. June attacked Clara's hair with a brush and determination, creating an elaborate updo that would have done a society matron proud. Willa contributed by scattering wildflowers across every available surface, including Clara's bed. Thomas appeared briefly to announce that the minister had arrived and Papa was acting weird, then disappeared again. When Clara finally descended the stairs in Amelia's dress, hair-pinned and heart-hammering, she found the front room transformed. Someone, probably Landon, had cleared away clutter and brought in flowers from outside. The minister stood by the fireplace, a weathered man with kind eyes, who looked like he'd performed his share of unconventional ceremonies. Landon stood beside him in a clean shirt and his best trousers, hands clasped behind his back. When he saw Clara, his expression shifted into something she couldn't quite read. You look... He stopped, started again. The dress suits you. June insisted. Clara managed a smile despite her nervousness. Something about honoring Amelia. She would have liked that. Would have liked you. Landon offered his arm. Ready? No, not remotely, but Clara took his arm anyway and let him lead her to stand before the minister. The ceremony was mercifully brief. The minister spoke about commitment and family, about the bonds that transcend blood. He asked if they understood they were making sacred vows, even if the circumstances were unusual. Both answered yes. Then came the promises. Do you, Landon James Pierce, take Clara Wynne to be your lawfully wedded wife, to honor and protect, in sickness and health, for as long as you both shall live? I do. Landon's voice was steady. And do you, Clara Wynne, take Landon Pierce to be your lawfully wedded husband, to honor and stand beside in sickness and health for as long as you both shall live. Clara looked at the man beside her, this widower who'd offered her sanctuary and security without demanding she be anything other than herself. At the three children watching with hope written plain on their faces. At the life she'd stumbled into and somehow made her own. "I do," she said clearly. Landon slipped his mother's ring onto her finger. Clara did the same with his father's ring, fingers trembling only slightly. The gold was warm from Landon's pocket, solid and real. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of New Mexico, I pronounce you husband and wife." The minister smiled. "You may kiss your bride, if you wish." The moment stretched out, awkward and uncertain. This hadn't been discussed, wasn't required. They stood frozen, neither sure what the other wanted. Then Landon leaned forward and pressed a gentle kiss to Clara's forehead, chaste, brotherly, perfect for what they were building. June burst into tears. Happy ones, judging by her grin. Thomas clapped solemnly. Willa, understanding that something significant had happened, started clapping too, shouting, "Mama! Papa!" in gleeful confusion. They signed the papers. The minister congratulated them, accepted his fee, and departed with the air of a man who'd seen stranger unions and figured this one had better odds than most. Then it was just the five of them, a brand new family, legally bound, facing an uncertain future together. Landon cleared his throat. "I had Morrison bring out supplies for a celebration. Nothing fancy, just, I thought we should mark the occasion." That was thoughtful. Clara was hyper-aware of the ring on her finger, of the paper that made her Clara Pierce instead of Clara Wynne. "Though I'm not sure what one serves at a practical wedding." "Cake," June announced. "Every wedding needs cake. Papa ordered one from the boarding house. Mrs. Chen makes the best cakes in the territory." The afternoon dissolved into something almost festive. They ate cake that was indeed excellent, drank lemonade, and the children performed an impromptu show that involved Thomas reciting multiplication tables and June reading poetry with dramatic flair. Willa's contribution was falling asleep in Clara's lap, sticky with frosting and contentment. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the cliffs in shades of amber and rust, Clara found herself alone on the porch with Landon. The children were inside playing some elaborate game of June's invention. "So," Landon said, leaning against the railing. "We're married." "Apparently so." Clara studied the ring on her finger, turning it slowly. "Feels strange, like I'm playing dress-up in someone else's life." "Is it what you expected?" "I don't know what I expected. Certainly not this." She gestured vaguely at the ranch, the house, the sound of children's laughter drifting through the open door. 6 weeks ago, I was on a stagecoach convinced I'd spend the rest of my life alone. Now I'm married with 3 children. It's absurd." Absurd, but good. There was vulnerability in the question, quickly hidden, but there. Clara considered. Was it good? She'd given up her independence, tied herself legally to a man she barely knew, taken on responsibility for 3 children with complicated needs and deeper trauma. By any reasonable measure, she'd made a reckless decision. But June was inside, laughing without that shadow of fear in her eyes. Thomas had started leaving his carved animals in the main room instead of hiding them in his room, a sign of trust, of claiming space. Willa slept peacefully through the night now, secure in the knowledge that Mama would be there in the morning. And Clara felt needed in a way she'd never felt with Charles, valued in a way she'd never felt in Missouri. Here, her inability to bear children didn't make her defective. It made her available, free to pour all that stored-up mothering into 3 souls who needed it desperately. "Yes," she said finally. "Absurd, but good." Landon's shoulders relaxed. "Good. That's good." They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun paint masterpieces across the desert sky. Then Landon spoke again, voice careful. "I want you to know that nothing has to change. Between us, I mean. Separate rooms, separate lives. This is still a partnership, not—" He stumbled over the words. "I'm not expecting anything you're not ready to give." Clara's heart did something complicated in her chest. Relief, certainly, but also something that felt uncomfortably like disappointment. Thank you, she managed. I appreciate that. More silence. This one less comfortable. Clara became acutely aware of the space between them, of the ring on her finger that said they were married, but the distance that said they were still essentially strangers. I should check on the children, she said finally, needing escape from the charged atmosphere. Clara, wait. Landon caught her hand, not quite holding it, but making contact. I want you to be happy here. I know this isn't what you probably dreamed of, practical marriages and ranch life and other people's children, but I'll do my best to make sure you don't regret this. I promise you that. She looked at their hands, his large and work-roughened, hers smaller but equally marked by labor. Two people brought together by necessity and circumstance, trying to build something worthwhile from the wreckage of their separate disappointments. I don't regret it, Clara said softly. I'm terrified by it, and I have no idea what I'm doing, but I don't regret it. Landon's grip tightened briefly, then released. That's all I needed to hear. That night, after the children were finally asleep, a process that took longer than usual, partly because they were excited, and partly because they kept finding excuses to check that Clara was still there, she found herself standing in the hallway between her room and Landon's. Her room. Still her room, despite the marriage. The arrangement hadn't changed, just the paperwork. But as Clara prepared for bed in her small space, she couldn't help thinking about the man down the hall. Her husband, in-law if not in practice. They'd promised to honor each other, to stand beside each other, to build a life together. But what did that mean, practically? How did two people navigate a marriage built on necessity rather than love? She was still pondering when a soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Clara, it's June. Can I come in? Of course. June slipped inside, wearing her nightgown and carrying her slate. She climbed onto Clara's bed without asking, settling cross-legged against the pillows. Can't sleep? Clara asked, sitting beside her. Too much thinking. June studied her slate, running fingers over the frame. Today was good. The wedding, it felt right. Does that make sense? Perfect sense. Thomas said it's weird that we're happy about it, that most kids would be mad if their papa married someone new, but I'm not mad. June looked up, eyes earnest. I'm glad. Is that bad? Is it mean to First Mama? Clara's heart twisted. Oh, honey, no, it's not mean. Your First Mama loved you and wanted you to be happy. She'd be glad you have someone to take care of you. You really think so? I know so. Love doesn't run out just because someone new comes along. You can love me and still love her memory. Both things can be true. June was quiet for a moment, processing. Then, do you love Papa? The question caught Clara off guard. It's complicated. That means no. June said it matter-of-factly, without judgment. That's okay. First Mama said love takes time. That she didn't love Papa right away either. She had to learn him first. She leaned against Clara's shoulder. Maybe you just need time to learn him. Maybe so. Clara wrapped an arm around the girl. Are you okay with that? With us figuring things out as we go? As long as you don't leave. You won't leave now, right? Even if you decide you don't like being married? I won't leave. I promised, remember? And I keep my promises. June sighed, a sound of pure contentment. Good. Because Thomas would be really mad if you left. He doesn't show it, but he loves you. We all do. The words settled around Clara like a blanket. Warm, heavy, undeniable. These children loved her, had claimed her as their own despite knowing her for barely 2 months, had decided she was worth keeping and damn the consequences. I love you too, Clara whispered. All of you. So much it scares me sometimes. That's what Papa says about us. That loving people is scary because you might lose them. June yawned, the excitement of the day finally catching up. But Thomas says the scary things are usually worth it. Thomas is very wise. Don't tell him that. His head's already too big. Clara laughed softly and helped June back to her own room, tucking her in with the practiced ease of someone who'd been doing this for years rather than weeks. The girl was asleep before Clara even reached the door, worn out by emotion and celebration. Back in her own room, Clara caught sight of her reflection in the small mirror. Clara Pierce now, legally if not emotionally. A wife. a mother, a rancher's woman. All the things she'd thought she'd be with Charles, achieved in the most unexpected way possible. The ring glinted on her finger, plain gold, inherited, practical. Just like their marriage, just like their family. But as Clara finally slipped into bed, she found herself hoping that maybe, someday, practical could become something more. That learning someone, as June had put it, might lead to loving someone. It was too early to think about such things, too complicated, too risky. They'd agreed to a paper marriage, to separate rooms and separate hearts. Yet lying there in the darkness, listening to the sounds of her family sleeping around her, Clara couldn't help but wonder if agreements made in fear were meant to be broken. If two people drawn together by necessity might find something resembling joy in the process. If a barren woman and a grieving widower might somehow build something beautiful from their broken pieces. Only time would tell. But for tonight, Clara was content to be Clara Pierce, wife and mother, still figuring out what those titles meant but no longer running from them. The future could wait. Tonight she had a ring on her finger, 3 children sleeping safely under her roof, and a husband who'd promised to honor her exactly as she was. It wasn't the life she'd planned, but maybe, just maybe, it was the life she needed, and that would have to be enough. The first week of marriage passed in careful politeness, both Clara and Landon navigating their new arrangement like dancers learning unfamiliar steps. They maintained their separate rooms, their separate routines, speaking primarily about household matters and the children's needs. It was cordial, functional, and increasingly suffocating. Clara told herself this was what she'd agreed to. A practical marriage, partnership without passion, security without surrender. But late at night, lying alone in her narrow bed, she couldn't stop thinking about the man down the hall. The way his voice softened when he talked to Willa. How his hands moved with unconscious grace when he worked with wood or leather. The rare smiles that transformed his weathered face into something almost beautiful. She was beginning to understand what June had meant about learning someone. And the more Clara learned about Landon Pierce, the more she wanted to know. It was Thomas who finally broke through the artificial distance they'd constructed. 2 weeks after the wedding, Clara found the boy in the barn, attempting to saddle a horse that was clearly too large for him. His face was set with determination, but his hands shook as he struggled with the heavy leather. "Thomas, what are you doing?" He jumped, nearly dropping the saddle. "Nothing, just, I need to ride out to the north pasture, check on something." "That's your father's job." "Papa's busy, and I can do it. I'm not a baby." His voice cracked on the last word, betraying the emotion he was trying to hide. Clara moved closer, taking in his red-rimmed eyes and the defensive set of his shoulders. What's really going on? For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, like a dam breaking, the words came flooding out. "I heard Papa talking to Morrison yesterday, when we went to town for supplies. Morrison asked if the marriage was working out, if you were settling in okay, and Papa said..." Thomas's voice broke. "He said it was an arrangement, that you were here for us kids, not for him, that he didn't expect you'd stay if we didn't need you anymore." Clara's heart clenched. "Thomas, is that true? Are you only here because of us? Because if we get older and don't need a mama anymore, will you leave?" His eyes filled with tears he refused to let fall. "Because I'll need you forever. I'll never stop needing you, I swear." Clara knelt in the hay, not caring about her dress, and pulled the boy into her arms. He resisted for a moment, then collapsed against her, finally letting the tears come. "Listen to me," she said fiercely, holding him tight. "I'm not going anywhere. Not when you're grown, not when you're old enough to handle things yourself, not ever. Do you understand? I chose this family. I chose you. That doesn't have an expiration date." "But Papa said..." "Your Papa is scared too. He's trying to protect himself from getting hurt, but that doesn't change the truth." Clara pulled back to meet Thomas's eyes. "I love you. I love June and Willa, and I..." She stopped, surprised by what she was about to say. "I love your father too. Maybe not the way married people usually love each other yet, but I care about him. I want to build a life here, with all of you." Thomas wiped his nose on his sleeve. "You really mean it? Have I ever lied to you? No? Then trust me now. I'm staying, through everything. Through you growing up and not thinking I'm cool anymore. Through arguments and hard times and all of it. That's what family means. The boy nodded slowly, then threw his arms around her neck. I'm glad you married Papa. Even if it's weird, even if it's just an arrangement or whatever, I'm glad you're here. Clara held him until his breathing steadied, until the fear drained out of his small body. Then she helped him unsaddle the horse, properly, teaching him the right way, and walked him back to the house with her arm around his shoulders. But Thomas's words haunted her for the rest of the day. An arrangement. That's how Landon had described their marriage to Morrison. Technically true, but hearing it stated so baldly hurt more than Clara wanted to admit. That evening, after the children were in bed, she found Landon in his study, a small room off the main house where he handled ranch accounts. He looked up when she entered, surprise flickering across his face. Clara, is something wrong? I need to talk to you. She closed the door behind her, steeling herself. Thomas told me what you said to Morrison, about our marriage being an arrangement. Landon set down his pen, expression guarded. I see. Is that really how you think of this? Of us? Clara kept her voice level, but emotion leaked through. As a business transaction? Me providing childcare in exchange for room and board? That's not... He stopped, frustrated. That's not what I meant. Morrison was fishing for gossip. I was trying to shut down speculation about whether we're actually in love or whatever romantic nonsense people expect. So you told him I'm here for the children, not for you. Aren't you? Landon's voice was quiet, almost gentle. That's what we agreed to, Clara. A practical marriage, separate lives. I thought that's what you wanted. It was. It is. Clara moved closer, hands clenched at her sides. But Thomas is terrified I'll leave when he gets older, when the children don't need me anymore. And I realize that I've never actually told you. She took a breath. I'm not just here for them, Landon. I'm here for you too. His expression shifted, something raw and vulnerable breaking through the careful control. You don't have to say that. I'm not saying it because I have to. I'm saying it because it's true. Clara sat in the chair across from his desk, forcing herself to maintain eye contact. These past weeks, living as your wife, even our strange version of being married, it's made me realize something. I like this life. I like teaching the children and managing the household and sitting with you in the evenings. I like who I am here, and part of that is because of you. Landon was very still. What are you asking for, Clara? I don't know. Maybe nothing. Maybe just honesty. She twisted the ring on her finger. We got married to protect the children, to make things legal and proper. But somewhere along the way, this started feeling like more than an arrangement, at least for me. And I need to know if I'm alone in that or if you feel it too. The silence stretched out, heavy with possibility and fear. Outside, a coyote howled in the darkness. Inside, Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. Finally, Landon spoke, his voice rough. I feel it too. Have been feeling it for weeks, but I didn't want to... He stood abruptly, pacing to the window. You came here running from a man who abandoned you when you couldn't give him children. The last thing I wanted was to make you feel trapped or obligated. So I kept my distance, tried to give you space to figure out what you wanted without pressure. That's very noble and very stupid. Clara stood too, moving to stand beside him. I'm not some fragile thing that needs protecting from your feelings, Landon. I'm your wife. Your actual wife. And I'm tired of tiptoeing around what this could be because we're both scared. He turned to face her fully, and Clara saw everything he'd been hiding, longing and fear and desperate hope all tangled together. What are you saying? I'm saying maybe we try being married for real, not separate rooms and separate lives, but actually building something together. Her voice softened. I'm saying I want to know you better, to learn you, like June said, to see if this practical arrangement could become something more. Landon's hand came up to cup her face, the touch gentle and questioning. Are you sure? Because once we start down that road, I don't know if I can go back to polite distance. I've wanted... He stopped, jaw clenching. I've wanted to kiss you properly since the wedding, since before the wedding, if I'm honest. But I thought you needed me to be patient. I've needed you to be brave, Clara whispered. We've both been so careful not to risk anything that we've been living half lives. I don't want that anymore. Neither do I. Then Landon was kissing her, Not the chaste forehead kiss from their wedding, but a real kiss, full of longing and relief and promise. Clara melted into it, into him, her hands coming up to grip his shoulders while his arms wrapped around her waist. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Landon rested his forehead against hers. "So," he said, voice unsteady, "does this mean you're moving into my room or am I moving into yours?" Clara laughed, giddy with possibility. "Yours has more space and a better view. Practical even now. Someone has to be." They stood there in the lamplight, holding each other, and Clara felt the last of her walls crumble. This man, this family, this life. They'd become hers not through blood or duty, but through choice. Through showing up day after day and deciding that what they were building mattered more than what they'd lost. The sound of small feet padding down the hallway interrupted the moment. Willa's voice, sleepy and distressed, called out for Mama. Clara smiled against Landon's chest. "Duty calls." "Let me." He kissed her forehead, that gesture that had become theirs. "Get some rest. We'll figure out the sleeping arrangements tomorrow." But as Clara climbed the stairs to comfort Willa, she found June and Thomas both awake, hovering anxiously in the hallway. "We heard voices," June said quickly. "Were you and Papa fighting?" "No, sweetheart. Just talking." Clara gathered Willa from her crib, the toddler immediately calming in her arms. "Important talking." Thomas studied her face with those too perceptive eyes. "Good talking?" "Very good talking." Clara settled on the floor with Willa in her lap, gesturing for the older children to join her. They did immediately, June curling against her side and Thomas sitting close enough to touch. "I want you all to know something. I'm not going anywhere. Not when you're older, not when you think you don't need me anymore. This is forever. You're stuck with me." "Good," June whispered. "Because we're keeping you." "Yeah," Thomas added, trying to sound casual and failing. "You're not so bad, I guess." Clara laughed, pulling them all close. Her children, her family, built not from her body but from her heart. When Landon appeared in the doorway sometime later, he found all four of them asleep in a pile on the floor. Clara propped against the wall with Willa sprawled across her lap, June tucked under one arm and Thomas's head on her shoulder. He stood there for a long moment, just watching. Then he carefully lifted Willa and placed her in the crib, repeated the process with June and Thomas, carrying them to their own beds with practiced ease. Clara stirred when he lifted her. The children? Already taken care of. He carried her down the hall, past her small room, to his larger one at the end. "Come on, let's start this properly." She should have protested, should have insisted on propriety even now. Instead, Clara let him settle her into his bed, their bed now, and curled against his solid warmth when he joined her. "This is madness," she murmured against his chest. "The best kind." His arm tightened around her. "Thank you, Clara, for taking a chance on us, on me. And thank you for seeing me as more than broken." They fell asleep like that, tangled together, the careful distance they'd maintained for weeks finally abandoned in favor of something real. The next morning, the children discovered them at breakfast, sitting close, Landon's hand covering Clara's on the table, both of them looking rumpled and content. June's squeal of delight probably woke half the territory. "Does this mean you're really married now? Like actually married?" "We were actually married before," Landon said mildly. "But yes, things are going to be different now." "Good different?" Thomas asked carefully. "Very good different." Clara squeezed Landon's hand. "The best kind." Willa, understanding nothing of the undercurrents, banged her spoon cheerfully. "Mama, Papa, happy!" Out of the mouths of babes, the days that followed were an adjustment, learning to share space, to navigate the intimacy of actual marriage rather than their careful arrangement. But it was easier than Clara expected, as if they'd been building toward this all along and had just needed permission to stop being afraid. The children blossomed under the new dynamic. June grew confident, her nightmares decreasing in frequency. Thomas started bringing his carved animals to show both Clara and Landon, seeking approval from them as a unit rather than separately. Even Willa seemed to sense the shift, her vocabulary exploding as she chattered to anyone who'd listen about Mama and Papa, as if they'd always been together this way. It was almost 3 months after the wedding when the real test came. Clara was in the garden, showing June how to identify different herbs, when she heard the sound of multiple horses approaching. She straightened, shading her eyes against the afternoon sun, and felt her stomach drop. A man in official-looking clothes rode at the head of a small group. Behind him, Margaret Dawson sat side-saddle on a gray mare, expression triumphant. "Mrs. Pierce?" The official dismounted. "I'm Arthur Hendricks, Territorial Family Services. I'm here to investigate a complaint regarding the children in your care." Claire's blood went cold. "What complaint?" Margaret spoke up, voice dripping false concern. "We're worried about the children's welfare. Living situation seems irregular. A woman who appeared out of nowhere, married in suspicious haste, possibly taking advantage of a grieving widower. Someone had to look out for those poor orphans." "They're not orphans. They have a father." Clara kept her voice level despite the fury building in her chest. "And I'm their legal mother now. The marriage is legitimate, filed with territorial offices." "So I've been told." Hendricks pulled out papers. "But I'm still required to investigate. Interview the children, inspect the living conditions, verify that Mrs. Pierce, is a suitable guardian." Landon appeared from the barn, taking in the scene immediately. "What's going on here?" "Official investigation," Hendricks said. "Complaint filed suggesting the children are at risk." "That's absurd." Landon moved to stand beside Clara, a united front. "My children are healthy, educated, and loved. There's no risk here." "Then you won't mind if I verify that." Hendricks' tone was polite but firm. "Where are the children now?" Thomas and Willa were napping inside. June stood frozen beside Clara, face pale with fear. Clara put a protective hand on the girl's shoulder. "June is right here. The younger two are resting." "June." Hendricks crouched to the girl's level, trying to look friendly. "Can you tell me about your home? Are you happy here?" June's eyes darted to Clara, to Landon, then back to Hendricks. Clara could see her struggling, trained by too many adults who'd hurt her to be careful what she said. "It's okay," Clara said softly. "Just tell the truth." The girl took a breath. "I'm happy. Clara, my mama, she teaches us every day. Real lessons, not just primers. She makes the house feel warm. She doesn't yell or hit or say we're too much trouble." Her voice grew stronger. "She saved Willa's life when she got the fever. She stayed up all night taking care of her. The other ladies would have just called the doctor and waited, but Mama knew what to do." "And your father? How does he treat Mrs. Pierce?" "He loves her." June said it with absolute certainty. "Maybe he didn't at first, but he does now. I can tell. He smiles more. He doesn't look so tired all the time." Hendricks made notes, then gestured toward the house. "I'll need to see the living conditions. Interview the other children." What followed was the most humiliating hour of Clara's life. Hendricks inspected every room, made notes about cleanliness and organization, woke Thomas and Willa to ask them questions about their care. Margaret Dawson followed, making pointed observations about how quickly things had progressed. But the children saved them. Thomas, despite his initial wariness, spoke clearly about his lessons and the carved animals Papa helped him make. Willa, when asked if she was happy, launched herself at Clara with a shrieked, "Mama!" that probably answered the question better than words could. Finally, Hendricks finished his inspection and gathered his papers. "The children appear well cared for. The house is clean, they're being educated, and they show no signs of neglect or abuse." He looked at Margaret Dawson. "I'm not sure what you expected me to find, ma'am, but there's nothing here that warrants intervention." Margaret's face reddened. "But the situation, it's improper. She trapped him into marriage. The marriage is legal and appears to be working well for all involved." Hendricks' tone cooled. "Mrs. Dawson, filing false complaints wastes territorial resources and harms families. I suggest you find more productive uses of your time." He turned to Clara and Landon. "You're in the clear. Paperwork will reflect that the children are in good care. I'll file my report within the week." After they left, Margaret Dawson looking murderous, Hendricks appearing relieved to escape, the family stood in stunned silence. Then June burst into tears. "I was so scared. I thought they'd take us away." Clara gathered all three children close, Landon's arms wrapping around all of them. They're not taking anyone anywhere. We're a family, legal, official, and not going anywhere. That night, after the children were finally asleep, it took extra time, all of them needing reassurance. Clara found herself shaking with delayed reaction. Landon pulled her close on the porch, both of them staring out at the darkened landscape. "That was too close," she whispered. "If we hadn't actually gotten married, if we'd just kept the informal arrangement. But we did. You're their legal mother. The paperwork is filed. Margaret Dawson can complain all she wants, but it doesn't change the facts." He kissed her temple. "You saved us. Again." "We saved each other." Clara turned in his arms to face him. "That's what family does." The months that followed proved her right. The ranch prospered under their combined management. The children grew and thrived, secure in the knowledge that their family was permanent. The gossip eventually died down when it became clear that the Pierces were boring and happy and not providing any scandalous entertainment. Clara's teaching evolved beyond the dining room table. Other ranch families heard about the education their children were receiving and asked if she'd take on more students. By the end of the year, she was running a proper school 3 days a week, teaching 8 children in the barn that Landon had converted into a classroom. It was everything she'd never dared to dream about: meaningful work, beloved children, a partnership with a man who valued her mind as much as her presence. On their first anniversary, Landon surprised her with a gift. Clara opened the box to find a locket, silver, delicate, with space for 3 photographs. "For the children," he explained. "Thought you might want to carry them with you, something permanent." Clara's eyes filled with tears. "It's perfect." "Not quite." He pulled out 3 small photographs, formal portraits he must have commissioned during their last trip to Santa Fe. June, Thomas, and Willa, all dressed up and looking solemn and beautiful. "Now it's perfect." She helped him place the photographs in the locket, fingers trembling. When it was complete, Landon fastened it around her neck, the weight of it settling against her heart. "Thank you," she whispered, "for all of it, for seeing past what I couldn't do to what I could be. Thank you for taking a chance on a broken widower and his wild children." Landon turned her to face him. "I know I said this was a practical marriage, an arrangement, but Clara," his voice roughened with emotion, "I love you, completely, absolutely, and far beyond what I ever thought I'd feel again. You brought light back to this house. You gave my children a mother who chose them. You gave me a reason to believe in second chances." Clara's tears spilled over. "I love you too. I tried not to, tried to keep it practical and safe. But you made that impossible." "Good," he kissed her softly. "Because I'm not interested in practical anymore. I'm interested in real." They stood together on the porch as the sun set, painting the red cliffs in shades of gold and crimson. Inside, their children played some elaborate game that involved much shrieking and laughter. The house that had been silent with grief was now alive with joy. Later that evening, after the celebration dinner and the children's enthusiastic attempts at making an anniversary cake, Clara found herself in the small room that used to be hers, now converted into a study where she planned lessons and wrote letters. She pulled out her journal, the one she'd been keeping since her first day at Red Bluff Ranch, and opened to a fresh page. At the top she wrote, "1 year." Then in careful script, "When I arrived here, I thought I was running away from who I couldn't be. Turned out I was running toward who I was always meant to become. I came as a broken woman who couldn't have children. I stayed as a mother to 3 remarkable souls who needed exactly what I had to give. I married a good man thinking it was an arrangement. I fell in love with him thinking it was impossible." She paused, considering, then added, "I was told my body was inhospitable to life. They were wrong. Life doesn't only grow in wombs. It grows in kitchens where children laugh over spilled flour, in barns converted to classrooms, in bedrooms where nightmares are soothed and secrets shared, in the space between 2 people who chose each other despite every reason not to. I may never bear children of my own, but I'm more thoroughly a mother than I ever dreamed possible. And the family I found here, the one I built from dust and determination and stubborn love, is more real than any connected by blood alone." A soft knock interrupted her writing. Thomas stood in the doorway, holding one of his carved animals, this one a horse, beautifully detailed. "Made you something," he said, shuffling awkwardly. "For your anniversary, since you and Papa are being all mushy and stuff." Clara accepted the carving, running her fingers over the smooth wood. "It's beautiful, Thomas. Thank you." "It's you," he said. "The horse. Papa says horses are strong and steady and brave. That's how I think of you." He ducked his head, embarrassed. "Anyway, happy anniversary to you and Papa. I'm glad you decided to stay married for real." Before Clara could respond, he darted away, back to whatever game the children were playing. But his words settled around her heart like a blessing, strong and steady and brave. Not broken, not barren, not insufficient, just enough. Exactly enough. More than enough. Clara closed her journal and went to find her family, her loud, chaotic, perfectly imperfect family. June was trying to teach Willa a dance, both of them laughing as they stumbled over each other's feet. Thomas was showing Landon a drawing he'd made of the ranch. The house smelled of burnt cake and wood smoke and home. Landon looked up when she entered, and the love in his eyes took her breath away. He held out his hand, and Clara took it, letting him pull her into the chaos and warmth of their children's game. This was her life now. Not the quiet escape she'd planned, not the lonely refuge she'd expected, but something infinitely better. A home built on honesty and hope, a family bound by choice rather than chance, a love that had grown from practical seeds into something beautiful and real. She'd come to New Mexico territory believing she had nothing left to offer, that her inability to bear children made her incomplete, insufficient, unworthy of love. She'd been so profoundly wrong, because standing there in the lamplight with her husband's hand in hers, and 3 children who called her mama with absolute conviction, Clara understood the truth that had been waiting all along. Family wasn't about blood. Love wasn't about perfection. Home wasn't about meeting some predetermined standard of worthiness. It was about showing up, about choosing to stay when leaving would be easier, about looking at broken pieces, yours and theirs, and deciding they were worth keeping, worth building with, worth loving. She'd said she couldn't be a mother. He'd smiled and said he already had 3 calling her mama. Turned out they were both right and both wrong. Because Clara Pierce wasn't just a mother to 3 children who needed one. She was the mother they'd been waiting for, the one who stayed, the one who loved them not despite their trauma and complications, but through them. And Landon wasn't just a widower who'd needed household help. He was a man who'd seen past Clara's supposed brokenness to the strength underneath, who'd offered her security and partnership and eventually, impossibly, love. Together they'd built something the world hadn't thought possible, a family forged in grief and desperation that had somehow transformed into joy. On a ranch at the edge of civilization, under desert skies that painted themselves new every sunset, 5 souls had found each other in the wreckage of their separate disappointments and decided to build something better. Not perfect, never perfect, but real, and chosen, and theirs. And in the end, that was more than enough. It was everything.